It is a bedrock principle of modern warfare, fire superiority. The ability of an infantry squad to unleash such a dense and overwhelming volume of fire that the enemy is forced to keep their heads down, unable to move, unable to fight back, unable to think. This concept, the creation of a wall of lead behind which soldiers can maneuver, is the foundation upon which every modern army builds its tactics. The standard issue assault rifle, capable of spitting out dozens of rounds a minute, is the tool that makes this possible. It is a reality so fundamental, so baked into the DNA of combat, that we take it completely for granted. But this has not always been the law of the battlefield. For centuries, the soldier's power was measured differently. It was measured in the single, carefully aimed shot. From the Napoleonic Wars to the trenches of the First World War, the infantryman was a marksman, armed with a slow, powerful bolt-action rifle. His job was to make every shot count. The idea of giving every single soldier a weapon capable of rapid, sustained fire was considered wasteful, undisciplined, even absurd. It would burn through ammunition, it would ruin accuracy. It was a logistical nightmare. So where did the change happen? When did the lone crack of the marksman's rifle get drowned out by the continuous roar of the entire squad? This revolution has a name, the M1 Garand, and it has a time and place, the bloody hedgerows of Normandy in 1944. It was here that an entire army, for the first time in history, went to war with a semi-automatic rifle as its standard issue. This wasn't merely a new weapon, it was a new philosophy of combat unleashed upon an unsuspecting enemy. The story of the M1 Garand is not just about engineering or firepower. It is a story of a profound, earth-shattering collision between two military worldviews. One, a German doctrine perfected over decades, built on the surgical precision of the machine gun. The other, an American approach that, almost by accident, armed ordinary men with an extraordinary ability to generate a storm of steel. To understand how this 8-shot rifle didn't just win firefights, but psychologically broke the most feared infantry in the world, we must open an investigation. And we must travel back to a time when the masters of war were utterly blind to the tidal wave of fire about to hit them. At its heart, this is a story about a profound and timeless question of power. Is it more effective to concentrate overwhelming strength in the hands of a single, highly trained specialist, or to distribute a high level of power equally among every member of a team? Is the decisive blow struck by the surgical scalpel, or the relentless, crushing weight of the sledgehammer? In the summer of 1944, this was not an abstract debate for philosophers in a seminar room. It was a question being answered with every trigger pull in every shell-torn pasture and shattered village in France. The German military machine was the ultimate expression of the first philosophy. It was a system of martial aristocracy built around the near-mythical figure of the machine gunner. This man, wielding the terrifying MG-42, was the heart, soul, and fist of the German infantry squad. The other 7 or 8 riflemen were his attendants, his protectors, his servants. They existed to carry his ammunition and to pick off targets he could not engage. The entire doctrine was a finely tuned instrument of death, beautiful in its lethal efficiency, but utterly dependent on its central pillar. The American approach was its polar opposite. It was a philosophy born of democratic industrialism. It did not seek to create one Superman, it sought to elevate every common man. The M1 Garand was a declaration that every single rifleman was the primary source of the squad's power. It was a tool that decentralized lethality, transforming a group of individuals into a single, fire-breathing organism. The investigation we are about to undertake, therefore, is about the catastrophic moment when a system of perfect specialists collides with a system of empowered generalists. It is the story of how a doctrine that appeared flawless on paper shattered into a million pieces when it met a reality it could not comprehend, a wall of fire coming from everyone. To grasp the scale of the shock that awaited the Wehrmacht in Normandy, we must first become accountants of violence. Let us examine the raw, brutal mathematics of the individual firefight. The standard German infantryman, the Lancer, carried the Karabiner 98 Cal. It was an excellent rifle, accurate, reliable, a masterpiece of bolt-action design. A well-trained soldier could fire, work the bolt, aim, and fire again at a rate of perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute. Each shot was a deliberate, singular act. This was the accepted rhythm of warfare, a rhythm that had dominated battlefields for nearly a century. Now, consider the American G.I. in the opposing ditch. His M1 Garand required no manual bolt cycling. With each pull of the trigger, the rifle fired and instantly readied itself for the next shot. His practical rate of aimed fire was not 15 rounds per minute, it was between 40 and 50. This is not a marginal improvement. It is a fundamental shift in the nature of combat. On a one-to-one level, the American soldier possessed a threefold advantage in sustained firepower. 3 bullets for every one of his opponents. Let us now scale this up to the squad level, and the numbers become truly terrifying. A German Gruppe of 10 men had its firepower concentrated in one weapon, the MG-42 machine gun. The 7 riflemen provided a base of fire of roughly 100 rounds per minute, but an American rifle squad of 12 men distributed its power. With nearly every man carrying a Garand, their combined theoretical rate of fire exceeded 400 rounds per minute, and that's before their own Browning automatic rifle opened up. In a head-on engagement, the American squad could bury the German one under a literal avalanche of lead. The sporadic cracks of bolt-action rifles were simply swallowed by the continuous deafening roar of semi-automatic fire. The final decisive numbers are not found on the battlefield, but on the factory floor. The German High Command was aware of semi-automatic technology. They even produced their own, the Gewehr 43. But in the theater of industrial war, quantity has a quality all its own. While Germany managed to produce around 400,000 of their semi-automatic rifles during the entire war, often reserved for specialist marksmen, the United States produced over 5.4 million M1 Garands. They did not give it to specialists, they gave it to everyone. It was a decision that turned an entire army into a weapon the world had never seen. This avalanche of statistics, however, is merely the symptom of a much deeper, more profound divergence. The true chasm that opened up in the fields of Normandy was not just between 2 rifles, but between 2 warring civilizations and their entire philosophies of combat. To understand the shock, one must understand that the Wehrmacht and the U.S. Army did not just fight differently, they thought differently, they built differently, and they conceptualized victory in fundamentally opposing terms. The German way was the way of the master craftsman. Their doctrine was a meticulously constructed cathedral of violence, and at its altar sat the MG-42 machine gun. The squad, the Gruppe, was an organism designed with a single purpose: to feed and protect this devastating weapon. The riflemen, with their bolt-action Kar-98s, were acolytes. Their role was one of precision, of careful, aimed shots to eliminate threats to the gunner. They were taught to conserve ammunition as if it were gold. In the workshop, this philosophy held true. A damaged weapon was a treasure to be painstakingly repaired, its components filed and fitted by a skilled armorer. This was a system of specialists, of martial artists, and it had proven its terrible beauty in Poland, in France, in Russia. The American way was the way of the assembly line. It was a philosophy not of craftsmanship, but of overwhelming, brutalist output. The U.S. Army viewed the battlefield as a vast industrial problem that could be solved with the application of mass and energy. The M1 Garand was the ultimate expression of this creed. It transformed the squad from a centralized hierarchy into a distributed network of fire. Power did not reside with one man, but with all of them. Ammunition was not a precious resource to be conserved. It was a tool of suppression, a currency to be spent lavishly to buy tactical freedom. If a rifle broke, the prevailing logic was not to repair, but to replace. From the depots flowed an endless river of guns, parts, and bullets, a logistical miracle that mirrored the nation's industrial heart. This was the collision of 2 worlds. One, an old world of martial tradition, specialized skill, and resource scarcity, which created soldiers of immense individual prowess. The other, a new world of mass production, standardization, and seemingly infinite abundance, which created an army that was itself a weapon. The German soldier was a finely honed rapier, deadly and precise. The American squad was a wave of liquid steel, less elegant perhaps, but possessing a crushing, irresistible momentum. And so, the mystery deepens. The weapon itself was only the tip of the spear. The true decisive factor was the industrial and cultural system that put it into the hands of millions. When the German High Command analyzed the American threat, they saw a nation of civilians in uniform, lacking the warrior spirit of the Lancer. They saw the weapon, they counted the divisions, but they failed utterly to comprehend the civilization that stood behind them. They were about to be defeated not just by a rifle, but by a philosophy they could not even begin to imagine. Let us travel back in time. The year is 1944. On the windswept coast of France, a German colonel, a veteran of the Eastern Front, watches his men drill. They are practicing the maneuver that crushed Europe 4 years prior. The machine gun team dashes forward, sets up their MG-42 in a matter of seconds, and unleashes a short, devastating burst. The riflemen, moving with practiced economy, take up positions on the flanks, their bolt-action rifles held at the ready. To the colonel, this is not a mere training exercise. It is a demonstration of an unbreakable formula for victory. He has read the intelligence reports about the impending invasion and the American army gathering across the channel. He is not worried. He has seen what happens when his men, forged in the crucible of total war, meet armies of amateurs. The Americans, he thinks, are a nation of factory workers and farmers, not soldiers. They are soft, undisciplined, accustomed to a life of comfort. They will be given uniforms and weapons, but this cannot instill the warrior ethos, the Soldatengeist, that is the birthright of the German infantryman. His gaze falls upon his riflemen, each one a trained marksman, taught to make every single shot a killing blow. The thought that the enemy might equip every soldier with a rapid-firing automatic rifle is, to him, a sign of their fundamental weakness. It is an admission of poor training, a crutch for men who cannot shoot straight, a wasteful and foolish doctrine that will see them exhaust their ammunition in the first frantic minutes of contact. Let them come, he thinks. Let them bring their mass-produced toys. Here, on the soil of Europe, they will learn the brutal difference between a shopkeeper and a soldier. This was not empty pride. This was a conviction built on a foundation of spectacular, world-shaking success. The German general staff and the officers it produced were not arrogant fools. They were the architects of a revolution in warfare. In 1939 and 1940, they had unleashed blitzkrieg upon an unsuspecting Europe, and their infantry had performed with a ruthless efficiency that left Allied armies in tatters. Poland had fallen in weeks. France, a great military power, had been brought to its knees in just 6. The world had watched in a mixture of terror and awe. The German infantry doctrine was not just a theory, it was the proven gospel of modern warfare. The engine of this success was the Gruppe, the infantry squad, and it was a masterpiece of tactical design. At its core, it was a mobile fortress built around a single weapon, the machine gun. The MG-34, and later the fearsome MG-42, was the queen of the battlefield, the true source of the squad's destructive power. Every other element, every other soldier, existed in relation to this weapon. The 7 or 8 riflemen carrying their Kar 98K rifles were not seen as the primary bringers of fire. They were the dedicated guardians of the Queen. They carried her ammunition, they protected her flanks from surprise attacks, and with their precise, economical fire, they eliminated the specific threats that the machine gunner could not address. This doctrine shaped the very soul of the German soldier, the Lancer. His training was an arduous, unforgiving process that hammered into him the virtues of discipline, fieldcraft, and above all, marksmanship. Ammunition was precious. A wasted shot was a sin. He was taught to be a predator, to use the terrain, to wait for the perfect moment, and to make his single shot count. He saw himself as a professional, a member of a warrior caste, hardened by years of combat on a dozen fronts. His experience was his armor, his doctrine was his faith. And so, the German military looked across the channel and saw an enemy that violated every principle they held sacred. They saw a force that seemed to embrace wastefulness as a virtue, that substituted crude material weight for refined tactical skill. Their confidence was, from their perspective, entirely logical. Their system had been tested in the fires of the greatest land battles in history and had emerged triumphant. Why would it fail now against an army of amateurs who did not even seem to understand the fundamental grammar of war? Their entire history, up to that point, told them it was impossible. In the quiet, map-lined offices of German High Command, the American Army was not a terrifying force, but a problem to be solved with cold arithmetic. Intelligence analysts, men of method and logic, compiled exhaustive reports on the enemy gathering in England. They analyzed everything: divisional structures, training schedules, officer backgrounds, and of course their standard issue equipment. Every piece of data was a number to be entered into the equation of the coming battle, an equation that, to them, produced a clear and comforting result: American defeat. The first variable in their calculation was the human material. Reports from attachés and neutral observers described the American soldier as a hastily trained civilian. Where a German Lancer was the product of years of grueling indoctrination and combat experience, the American G.I. was rushed through a few months of basic training. They were seen as physically soft, mentally undisciplined, and possessing none of the innate tactical sense that defined the German warrior. Captured training manuals confirmed this assessment, revealing a simplistic approach to warfare that seemed to gloss over the hard-learned lessons of the Eastern Front. It was in this context that they analyzed the M1 Garand. To the German mind, the weapon was a perfect reflection of the soldier who carried it. Its high rate of fire was not seen as a strength, but as a liability. It was a clear admission that the American soldier could not be trained to the level of a German marksman and therefore needed to compensate by spraying bullets in the general direction of the enemy. The German analysts calculated the logistical implications of this doctrine, and the numbers were staggering. An army where every man fired 3 to 4 times more often than their own would require a supply chain of impossible proportions. The tonnage of ammunition required would choke any port, overwhelm any truck convoy. This was the fatal flaw in their logic, a catastrophic failure of imagination. They meticulously analyzed the components of the American war machine, but were utterly blind to the new system those components created. They calculated the immense cost of this new way of fighting, but never conceived that the United States had the industrial and logistical power to nonchalantly pay that price. Their mathematics were precise, their data was accurate, but their entire framework was obsolete. They were using the logic of the 19th century to analyze the reality of the 20th, and in doing so, were methodically calculating their own doom. And so, the final report is written, the assessment is filed. The conclusion, reached not through arrogance but through the cold, dispassionate application of military science as they understood it, was unequivocal. The American Army, for all its material wealth, did not possess the doctrine, the training, or the logistical discipline to defeat the German Wehrmacht in a protracted land war. Their reliance on overwhelming individual firepower was not a new and brilliant strategy, but a tactical blunder on a continental scale, a fatal misunderstanding of the realities of combat. The final verdict, whispered in the halls of Oberkommando der Wehrmacht and echoed down the chain of command to the bunkers on the Atlantic Wall, was a statement of profound and absolute certainty. An army that substitutes wild firing for aimed shooting, that believes it can solve tactical problems by burying them under a mountain of shell casings, and whose supply lines must support this institutionalized wastefulness over a distance of 3,000 miles, cannot prevail. It is a house of cards. The first real push, the first taste of a true battle of attrition against a professional army, and it will collapse under its own weight. The American way of war is not a threat. It is a logistical and tactical impossibility. But meanwhile, 3,000 miles away from the mahogany-paneled offices of the German High Command, an entirely different kind of logic was being forged in steel and fire. The answer to the German doctrine was not being crafted in a military academy or debated by strategists. It was being born on the noisy, oil-stained floors of the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts. Here, the final act of a quiet, 15-year-long revolution was reaching its crescendo, driven not by a general, but by a soft-spoken civilian designer named John C. Garand. For over a decade, while the German Wehrmacht was perfecting its cult of the machine gun, Garand was engaged in a relentless, obsessive quest to solve a single problem: how to build a semi-automatic rifle that was not a fragile, complex toy for experts, but a rugged, brutally reliable tool for the common man. He fought a lonely war against military traditionalists, men who, much like their German counterparts, believed in the supremacy of the slow, deliberate, bolt-action marksman. They argued his design was too complex, that it would encourage soldiers to waste ammunition, that it was an answer to a question no one was asking. But Garand and the visionaries who eventually backed him understood something the old guard did not. They were not building an army of professional warrior artists. They were building an army of citizens, an army of mechanics, farmers, and clerks who needed a weapon that was simple to master and overwhelmingly effective under the terrifying stress of their first firefight. And now, in 1944, the debate was over. The factories were running 24 hours a day. The secret the German intelligence services had so fatally missed was not a new tank or a wonder weapon hidden in a laboratory. It was this rifle, a weapon whose very existence was a testament to a philosophy of war they were incapable of comprehending, now being placed into the hands of millions of men. The philosophy that created the M1 Garand was not born on a battlefield. It was born in the sprawling, relentless factories of Detroit. It was the logic of the assembly line, the ruthless pragmatism of American industry applied to the brutal problem of war. The German military mind, steeped in a century of Prussian tradition, sought to achieve victory through tactical elegance, through the perfection of a specialized system. The American mind, by contrast, sought to solve the problem by overwhelming it with mass, efficiency, and a revolutionary redefinition of firepower itself. This was the secret ingredient, the key idea that the German analysis had completely missed. This new doctrine was profoundly democratic in its nature. The Wehrmacht built its infantry squad around a single, highly trained aristocrat of the battlefield, the machine gunner. The U.S. Army, however, built its squad around the principle of the empowered citizen. The M1 Garand was a tool designed not for the career soldier with 10 years of range practice, but for the draftee from Iowa who had mere months to become a combat-effective infantryman. The weapon was a great equalizer. It gave the average terrified GI a means to fight back, to generate a volume of fire that could suppress his fear and his enemy simultaneously. It was a machine designed to make ordinary men extraordinary. This approach fundamentally redefined the economics of combat. Where the German command saw the Garand's high rate of fire as a critical flaw leading to ammunition waste, the American command saw it as its greatest strength. They asked a different question: what is more costly, bullets or lives? Their answer was unequivocal. Bullets were a commodity, stamped out by the billion in factories running day and night. An experienced infantryman was a precious, irreplaceable asset. The concept of marching fire, of entire squads advancing while laying down a continuous sheet of suppression, was the ultimate expression of this. It was a doctrine that used an expendable resource, ammunition, to purchase a priceless one, the survival and maneuverability of its soldiers. And the weapon itself was the physical embodiment of this rugged pragmatism. John Garand's 15-year obsession was not with creating the most accurate or elegant rifle, but the most reliable one. The M1 was a brute of a weapon, heavy and built with wide tolerances. It could be caked in mud, drenched in rain, dropped on the ground, and it would still fire. It was simple enough to be field-stripped by a soldier with numb fingers in a dark foxhole. It was a workman's tool, not an artist's instrument. It was a Ford tractor, not a Mercedes race car, designed to do one job, put rounds downrange again and again under the worst conditions imaginable. This was the philosophy about to be unleashed, not the art of war, but the industrialization of it. The room in the War Department was steeped in the certainties of the past. The portraits of stern, bearded generals from the Civil War and the Great War looked down from the walls, guardians of an established military orthodoxy. On the long mahogany table, surrounded by men in crisp uniforms, lay the M1 Garand. It was not just a piece of machinery, it was an argument. And the proposal it represented was, to many in that room, nothing short of heresy. The plan was not to issue it to shock troops, not to marksmen, not to special units. The plan was to make this complex, gas-operated 8-shot rifle the standard weapon of every single American infantryman, from the cook to the frontline rifleman. The voice of skepticism belonged to a gray-haired general, a man who believed in the immutable truths of warfare as he had learned them. He argued that they were proposing the willful destruction of the American infantryman's greatest virtue, his marksmanship. The bolt-action Springfield, he contended, was a tool that taught discipline. It forced a soldier to make every shot count. This new weapon, he warned, would breed carelessness. It would encourage panicked, wasteful spraying of ammunition, spray and pray. He pointed out its tactical flaws, like the famous loud ping the rifle made when its clip ejected, a clear signal to any nearby enemy that the American soldier was now helpless and reloading. They were, in his view, about to trade a century of proven doctrine for a noisy, ammunition-hungry mechanical crutch. But another voice in the room, one less concerned with tradition and more attuned to the humming cadence of the production line, offered a chillingly modern rebuttal. The argument was not that marksmanship was obsolete. The argument was that the very definition of marksmanship was about to change. The next war, this voice argued, would not be won by the lone, skilled sharpshooter, but by the squad that could control a parcel of land through an impenetrable volume of fire. Suppressive fire was the new marksmanship. They were not creating an army of individual hunters. They were creating an army whose basic fighting unit was a fire-breathing machine with interchangeable human parts. The decision was made. The traditionalists were overruled. The sheer industrial logic of the proposal was too powerful to deny. But even as the production orders were signed and the immense machinery of American industry began to turn, a deep and profound uncertainty remained. This was not a simple upgrade of equipment. It was a wager of staggering proportions, staking the outcome of the coming war and the lives of millions of men on a radical, unproven theory of combat. They had thrown the dice. The only thing left was to wait for the brutal judgment of the battlefield. The 6th of June, 1944. The invasion has begun. After the initial chaos of the landings, the battle for France becomes a brutal, intimate affair in the Norman hedgerow country. The bocage. It is a green labyrinth of small fields, sunken lanes, and thick, ancient earth walls crowned with impenetrable vegetation. To the German command, this terrain is a gift. It is a defender's paradise, a landscape perfectly suited to their doctrine of ambush and the devastating fixed-fire power of the MG-42. Here, they believe, the American advance will bleed itself dry. The first encounters are small, vicious, and confusing. A German patrol, moving with the quiet confidence of veterans, edges along a sunken road. They know the symphony of combat, the familiar rhythm of a firefight, the opening burst from the machine gun, the scattered, deliberate cracks of rifles, the pause as bolts are worked and new targets acquired. But when they stumble upon an American squad, the sound they hear is alien. There is no opening solo. Instead, the entire orchestra erupts at once in a single, deafening crescendo. From every bush, every shadow, comes a continuous, tearing roar of gunfire. It is not a sequence of individual shots. It is a solid wall of noise and lead. The surviving Germans fall back, their minds struggling to process what just happened. The report filed by their lieutenant is tinged with disbelief. He writes that his patrol was ambushed not by a single squad, but what he estimated to be a platoon-sized force, equipped with an abnormally high number of automatic weapons. He noted that the enemy fire discipline was atrocious, a frantic, wasteful expenditure of ammunition, but its sheer volume was unlike anything he had ever encountered, even on the Eastern Front. It was a storm. At battalion headquarters, the report is read with a skeptical frown. The captain, a hardened professional, dismisses it as the product of a panicked lieutenant exaggerating in the fog of war. The Americans were known to have their Browning automatic rifle, the BAR. Perhaps the patrol had run into a squad with two of them. Perhaps the green American troops had all opened fire at once in a moment of panic. The explanation was rational, it fit the existing data, and it was comforting. The report is filed away. An anomaly. But then another report arrives from a different sector. And then another. They all tell the same impossible story, of small American units generating the firepower of forces 3 times their size, of attacks that felt not like infantry assaults, but like being caught in a hailstorm of steel. These were, for now, just whispers, isolated data points that had not yet formed a coherent picture. They were the first faint ticks of a time bomb, a sound that German intelligence, secure in its calculations and certainties, could not yet hear. Imagine you are Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, a platoon commander in the German 352nd Infantry Division. You are a professional, a veteran of the savage fighting in Russia, and this Norman hedgerow country is a tactician's dream. Your men are deployed perfectly. The MG-42 is nestled in a thicket of thorns, its cone of fire perfectly aligned to sweep the narrow dirt path that cuts between two towering hedgerows. Your riflemen, masters of fieldcraft, are invisible on the flanks. They wait, patient and lethal. They are the spiders, and this sunken lane is their web. Soon, the clumsy Americans, loud and careless, will walk into it. It is a scene you have rehearsed 100 times in your mind, a simple, elegant execution of a superior doctrine. Then you see them. A flicker of movement. Not a large force, perhaps 10 men, moving with a surprising quietness. Your machine gunner tenses, his hand hovering over the trigger. You are about to give the signal. But before the word can leave your lips, the world ends. It does not begin with the familiar, terrifying rip of your own machine gun. It begins with an explosion of sound from the other side of the hedge. Not the sound of one gun, but of 10 guns, all firing at once. There is no rhythm, no sequence, just a single, deafening, unbroken roar. The air becomes a solid thing, a wall of lead and noise that smashes into your position, shredding leaves, splintering branches, and thudding into the earthworks with a terrifying finality. Richter dives for cover, his heart pounding in his chest. His world had been built on a known rhythm, the cadence of battle. A burst from a machine gun, then a pause. A crack from a rifle, then the sound of a bolt being worked. These were the spaces, the breaths in the music of death, where a soldier could move, think, aim. But there are no spaces here, there is no pause. He peeks over the log for a fraction of a second and is driven back by a fresh volley of fire that seems to come from everywhere at once. His own riflemen are pinned, paralyzed. To return fire with a bolt-action rifle in the face of this storm is not an act of bravery, it is an act of suicide. For every one shot they can send back, 5 are returned in the same second. The tactical elegance of his ambush collapses into a brutal primal struggle for survival. The MG-42, his queen of the battlefield, is impotent. The moment it opens fire, its position is revealed, and it is instantly smothered by the concentrated fire of half a dozen semi-automatic rifles. The riflemen, meant to protect its flanks, are themselves pinned, unable to move or even see a target through the hail of lead. The German squad, this finely tuned instrument of specialists, has been bludgeoned into submission. The Craftsman has come face to face with the stamping press, and he is being hammered into the mud. The firing stops as abruptly as it began. The Americans move on. Cautiously, Richter and his surviving men emerge from their holes. The air is thick with the smell of cordite and terror. They look at each other, their faces pale with a new kind of fear. A fear born not of danger, but of incomprehension. It was not a company that had hit them. It was not even a full platoon. It was a single squad. And in the space of 30 seconds, that one squad had demonstrated that everything they knew about infantry combat, every lesson learned in blood from Poland to Stalingrad, was now wrong. The weapon they had dismissed as a logistical absurdity had just rewritten the laws of war. Nowhere was this violent collision of philosophies more perfectly encapsulated than in a single, desperate action that took place just hours after the D-Day landings. On a quiet patch of Norman farmland known as Brecourt Manor, a German artillery battery of 4 powerful 105mm howitzers was raining down hell upon the American troops struggling to get off Utah Beach. The guns were protected by an estimated 50 to 60 German infantrymen, dug into a well-designed network of trenches and machine gun nests. It was a textbook German strongpoint, a lethal problem that needed to be solved immediately. The solution arrived in the form of Lieutenant Dick Winters of the 101st Airborne and a dozen scattered, exhausted paratroopers he had managed to gather in the chaos. By any conventional military calculation, what Winters was about to attempt was madness. A dozen men against 50, attacking a prepared, fortified position. According to German doctrine, and indeed American doctrine of the old school, such an attack would be a futile, bloody failure. To suppress a position like that would require heavy machine guns, mortars, a full platoon of riflemen. Winters had none of that. What he had were 12 men and 12 M1 Garand rifles, and with this, he would rewrite the arithmetic of battle. He began by placing just 2 of his men to act as a base of fire. From the perspective of the German soldiers in the first trench, the sound that erupted from the distant tree line was utterly baffling. It was not the slow, measured fire of a couple of riflemen. It was a continuous, hammering roar, a volume of lead that suggested a full machine gun section was setting up. They did the only thing they could do. They kept their heads down. This was the genius of the new American warfare, distilled into a single moment. 2 Garands were generating the suppressive effect of a weapon 10 times their size. While the Germans were pinned by this phantom machine gun, Winters led another small team on a wide, looping flank attack. They slipped through the grass and burst into the trench line from the side. The fighting was at point-blank range, a frantic, brutal affair. And here again, the Garand was king. There was no time to aim carefully, no time to work a bolt. Victory belonged to the side that could put the most rounds in the air, the fastest. The Americans, firing 8 shots as quickly as they could pull the trigger, overwhelmed the defenders before they could even react. Winters then performed the tactic again, a deadly game of leapfrog. He used the men who had just taken the first trench to lay down a new base of fire on the next German position, while his original fire team moved up to become the new assault element. One by one, trench by trench, gun by gun, the German position was systematically dismantled from the inside out. A force of 50 veterans, secure in their fortifications, was paralyzed and destroyed by a dozen men who used their rifles not as precision instruments, but as hoses spraying a firestorm of steel. The Battle of Brecourt Manor was more than a heroic small unit action. It was a bloody, terrifying prophecy. It was the new American doctrine made manifest, a demonstration that the decentralized firepower of the M1 Garand had given even the smallest units the power to achieve the impossible. Far from the mud and terror of the hedgerows, in a requisitioned French chateau serving as a corps headquarters, a German general traces the front line on a vast map with a perfectly manicured finger. The atmosphere here is one of professional calm, of order imposed upon chaos. The first reports from the front, arriving by field telephone and motorcycle courier, had been troubling but easily explained. Unusually heavy rifle fire, enemy displays poor fire discipline, high expenditure of ammunition. The general and his staff had dismissed them with the weary condescension of professionals. This was simply the predictable signature of a green army, an army of amateurs, panicking in its first real taste of combat. They were firing wildly, wasting bullets, a tactical sin for which they would soon pay a heavy price. But as the days bled into weeks, the reports kept coming, and their consistency began to take on a terrifying weight. The trickle of anecdotal evidence became a flood. It was no longer possible to dismiss it as the fog of war. The general's intelligence officer, a man whose job was to find patterns in chaos, laid out the consolidated reports on the table. It was a mosaic of disbelief. A veteran sergeant, his squad wiped out, swearing he was attacked by a company, only for a captured American to reveal it was a single squad. A counterattack that withered and broke because the German riflemen could not raise their heads to fire their Kar 98s without facing an instantaneous volley of return fire from every man in the American line. The general stared at the reports, then back at the map. A cold dread, an emotion he had not felt since the darkest days before Stalingrad, began to creep into the room. He was a master of the tactical art, a high priest of the doctrine that had conquered Europe, and in a sickening flash of insight, he understood. This was not about poor fire discipline. It was a new and terrible discipline. If every American rifleman could, on his own, generate suppressive fire, then the entire German tactical system was obsolete. Their doctrine was a pyramid, and at its peak was the MG-42. But this new American reality meant that any 3 GIs firing from a ditch could become a base of fire. They could pin the unpinnable. They could neutralize the queen of the battlefield. The foundation of his world crumbled. The German squad was a surgical instrument designed for precision and economy. But the Americans had not brought a scalpel to this fight. They had brought a sledgehammer. No, it was worse than that. They had brought 1,000 small hammers, and they were giving one to every single soldier. The meticulously crafted German pyramid was being smashed to rubble by 1,000,000 decentralized individual blows. All their calculations, all their confident analysis of the enemy's logistical weakness, all of it was based on a fatal assumption that the enemy was playing the same game. The general looked at his chief of staff, his face ashen. The calm of the headquarters was shattered, replaced by the silent scream of a dawning, unimaginable catastrophe. "Our entire doctrine," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "is built around the supremacy of the machine gun. It is the rock upon which we build our defense." He paused, picking up a single report detailing the impossible rate of fire of an American patrol. "And they have given every man a tool to shatter that rock. The investigation for them was over. The verdict had just been delivered." The initial shock on the battlefield was only the first part of the German revelation. The second, and perhaps more soul-crushing part, came from a simple, horrifying observation. The Americans never ran out of ammunition. According to every German logistical calculation, the American army should have bled its supply lines dry within weeks. An army that fired its rifles at 3 times the standard rate should have created a logistical demand that no convoy of ships and trucks could possibly sustain. The German High Command, in their confident pre-invasion analysis, had waited for this inevitable collapse. They waited for the profligate Americans to exhaust themselves, for the wild firing to dwindle to a desperate trickle. But the collapse never came. On the contrary, the river of steel and brass only grew wider and deeper. German prisoners, when interrogated, spoke with a kind of bewildered awe about the American approach to supply. They saw GIs casually discarding half-empty clips of ammunition to load a full one. They watched as artillery fired not to destroy a specific target, but to level an entire grid square simply because a sniper might be there. For the German Lancer, who was taught to account for every single cartridge, who knew the value of a single bullet from the bitter experience of the Eastern Front, this was more than a tactical difference. It was a form of insanity. It was like watching a man light his cigars with $100 bills. This was not a failure of discipline. It was the deliberate, calculated weaponization of America's single greatest asset, its industrial might. The M1 Garand was not just a rifle. It was the delivery system for a new and terrifying doctrine, one that could only have been conceived by a nation of limitless production. Suppressive fire was not just a tactic, it was the American military's core philosophy. They had correctly identified that the true currency of the battlefield was not ammunition, but the lives of their soldiers. And they were willing to spend mountains of the former to preserve the latter. Every bullet fired at a hedge that might contain an enemy was a small price to pay for the freedom of movement it bought their riflemen. And so the German soldier, the ultimate professional, found himself in an impossible position. He was no longer fighting another soldier. He was fighting an entire economic system. His individual skill, his courage, his mastery of the bolt-action rifle, all of it was rendered meaningless. It was like being a master swordsman engaged in a duel with a man holding a fire hose. The M1 Garand, in its millions, became the nozzle for that hose, channeling the full, relentless pressure of the American arsenal directly onto the front lines. The war was no longer a contest of soldiers. It had become a contest of factories. And it was a contest Germany, for all its martial genius, had already lost. The true, undeniable proof in any investigation is not the analysis of the victor, but the confession of the vanquished. And by late July of 1944, these confessions began to arrive. They were not shouted in panicked radio transmissions, but written in the cold, precise language of official military reports, compiled by German intelligence officers from the after-action debriefs of exhausted survivors and the captured diaries of the fallen. The raw data of terror, collected from dozens of shattered platoons and companies, was being distilled into a single, horrifying conclusion. The officers writing these reports were men trapped in an agonizing paradox. They were products of a system that revered the soldier as a disciplined, professional marksman. And so, their early assessments of the Americans were filled with a familiar, comforting contempt. They wrote, and this is a near-direct quote from a captured report of the time, "The American infantryman is poorly trained in terrain usage and moving under fire. His fire discipline is poor. He fires wildly and constantly. This was the voice of the professional looking down upon the amateur. But the very next sentence of that same report contained the poison that nullified everything that came before it. However, in a firefight, he has a clear superiority due to his semi-automatic rifle. It was a moment of profound cognitive dissonance. How could a poorly trained soldier with bad discipline be superior? The answer was a truth so heretical it threatened to bring their entire worldview crashing down. And as the evidence mounted, the contempt in the reports began to fade, replaced by a stark professional honesty that was far more damning. The time for excuses was over. The truth had to be faced. In a captured divisional report from the Normandy front, the mask finally came off entirely. The language was stripped of all disdain, all attempts to soften the blow. It was the clear, cold voice of military reality, a confession laid bare for the high command to read. The report stated, unequivocally, the American rifleman's weapon is vastly superior. In a close-range firefight, our bolt-action rifle is a significant handicap. Any movement brings forth a storm of fire that is impossible to advance through. This was it. The final, irrefutable word. It was not a critique. It was a eulogy. It was a formal admission that the German Lancer, the mythologized iron soldier, the product of 100 years of Prussian military tradition, was now fundamentally outmatched by the American G.I. at the most basic level of combat. It was not about courage or training or spirit. It was about the tool in their hands. The voice of the vanquished had spoken, and in doing so, had confessed to the obsolescence of their warrior ethos in the face of an industrial storm. The admission of catastrophic failure, written in the cold ink of after-action reports, demanded more than just acknowledgement. It demanded a response. In the beleaguered design bureaus and armament factories of the Third Reich, a frantic scramble began. The problem, now understood in all its terrible simplicity, was the gun. The Kar 98K, the trusty, accurate but slow bolt-action rifle, was a death sentence in a close-quarters fight against the Garand. The answer, therefore, had to be a German semi-automatic rifle, a weapon that could match the American storm of fire, shot for shot. The solution that emerged was the Gewehr 43, or G43. On paper, it was an excellent weapon, in some respects even an improvement over the American rifle. It was lighter, featured a more modern 10-round detachable box magazine, and was designed for mass production. For the German engineers and generals who approved its accelerated production, it was a ray of hope. It was a German-engineered answer to an American problem. It was a tool that would allow the Lancer to fight back on equal terms, to reclaim his rightful place as the master of the infantry battle. Finally, they had a counter. But the creation of the Gewehr 43 was not merely an act of engineering. It was an act of profound ideological capitulation. This was the ultimate bitter irony. The German military establishment, which had built its entire ethos on the disciplined marksman and derided the American spray and pray philosophy as a sign of amateurism, was now desperately trying to copy that very philosophy. In order to survive, they were forced to abandon the doctrine that had been the source of their pride and their identity. The decision to mass-produce a semi-automatic rifle was a silent, humiliating confession that the Americans had been right all along. They were no longer setting the terms of engagement. They were reacting, trying to catch up in a race they hadn't even known they were losing. The true futility of their resistance, however, was revealed not on the design table, but on the factory floor. By late 1944, the industrial heart of Germany was being systematically pulverized from the air. The factories needed to produce the high-quality milled steel parts for the new rifle were being turned into smoking ruins. Skilled labor was scarce, raw materials were scarcer, and every decision was a desperate triage. The result was a tragic shortfall. While the United States had produced over 5 million Garands, Germany, in its death throes, managed to produce only around 400,000 G43s. It was a drop of water cast upon a raging inferno. And so, the countermeasure failed before it ever truly began. The G43 was never a standard-issue weapon. It was issued sparingly, 1 or 2 per squad, to designated marksmen. Instead of leveling the playing field, it only highlighted the disparity. A German squad might now have one man who could fire as fast as the Americans, but he was still facing an enemy squad where 10 men could do the same. The Gewehr 43, a fine weapon in its own right, thus became a monument not to German ingenuity, but to the crushing reality of their situation. It was a ghost weapon, a testament to a lesson learned far too late, a perfect tool that arrived in far too few numbers to stop the inevitable. The ultimate weapon of the German Wehrmacht was not made of steel. It was a belief, an ideological pillar as central to their war machine as any panzer division. It was the unshakable conviction in the innate martial superiority of the German soldier. The Lancer was not merely a fighter. He was the heir to a warrior tradition, a professional forged in the fires of a demanding, almost mystical, martial ethos. He saw himself as a wolf and the enemy, especially the soft consumerist American, as sheep. His courage, his discipline, his almost telepathic understanding of the battlefield, these were qualities that could not be manufactured on an assembly line. This was the central myth, the psychological armor that had proven impenetrable from Poland to the shores of the English Channel. But the M1 Garand was the great and terrible agnostic of the battlefield. It did not believe in myths, it did not respect tradition, it did not care about a soldier's warrior spirit or his years of arduous training. The continuous roaring wall of fire it produced was an industrial force, as impersonal and as brutally effective as a stamping press. In the face of this storm, the German soldier's most prized skills, his peerless marksmanship, his patient fieldcraft, his ability to make one shot a killing blow, were rendered tragically moot. He was a master artist whose canvas was being shredded by a sandblaster. He could not outthink a hailstorm. He could not outdiscipline an avalanche of lead. This was the deepest wound. It was a poison that seeped past the physical terror of the battlefield and into the very soul of the German soldier. To be defeated by a more numerous foe or outsmarted by a brilliant general is an honorable, understandable fate. But to be systematically dismantled and rendered irrelevant by a machine in the hands of the very men you dismissed as amateurs and shopkeepers was a unique and profound form of damnation. It meant that their entire worldview was a fraud. It meant that courage and discipline were no longer the deciding factors of battle. The war was not a contest of wills, but a calculus of output. The American G.I., the civilian in uniform, was winning not because he was a better warrior, but because he was a component in a more ruthless and efficient system of industrial violence. The roar of 1,000 Garands was more than the sound of a battle. It was the sound of a myth being ground into dust. In the end, when the guns fell silent and the great German war machine lay in ruins, the victors began the immense task of cataloging the reasons for their victory. They studied strategy, economics, and leadership. But perhaps the most profound answer came not from the generals or the historians, but from the testimony of the vanquished themselves. It was found in the interrogation rooms of 1,000 prisoner of war camps, in the weary voices of the men who had once believed themselves to be invincible. Over and over again, when asked what had broken them, the common soldiers, the Lancer, did not speak of tanks or planes. They spoke of the sound. The final, most eloquent epitaph for the German way of war was not a grand statement from a field marshal, but a simple, consolidated account, a story repeated with chilling consistency by men who had survived the inferno of the hedgerows. It was the voice of the frontline soldier, trying to explain a reality that had shattered his mind long before it broke his lines. He would say, "We were on the attack, moving through a field. Suddenly, all hell broke loose. It was not a machine gun. It was 10 machine guns. Every tree, every bush was spitting fire. We fell back. Later, we found out it was just one American rifle squad. They all had these automatic Garands. How can you fight that?" That last, desperate question was not a request for a new tactic. It was a statement of surrender. It was the final, unanswerable problem that had echoed from the foxholes of Normandy all the way to the highest echelons of the German command. It was the admission that the age of the warrior craftsman had been brought to a brutal and decisive end by the age of the industrial soldier. In that question lies the entire story. The shock, the incomprehension, and the final, Bitter acceptance that they had been defeated not just by a better rifle, but by an entire world, an entire philosophy that had rendered their concept of war obsolete.